Welcome to Barsham Shipmo Village Hall for this very intimate, very meaningful family celebration and commemoration of a member of their extended family, as we know, Second Lieutenant James G. Ferguson. I don't want to say too much, except to offer a very sincere welcome from all the trustees, a good number of whom are here today for the Village Hall, to Professor Howell Claiborne, to his wife Terry, and to their sons Alex and Robert. Very lovely to see you. Thanks for coming all these thousands of miles to be here today. I just have two things to say, really. Firstly, this monument exists because of the dedication and work of a local man who used to just live in the house next door to the Village Hall, Mr. Dennis Spall, often known as Henry to his intimates, which causes some confusion. And without him and the efforts of Neville and Ken Bauer and various other people on both the Parish Council and the Village Hall Committee, they did the fundraising and activated everything so that this monument, this memorial could be built. Since then, of course, since 1999, when that ceremony took place, Dennis was standing just about where Alistair is now at that time, I believe. Since then, sadly, he has passed, he's left us. But we have added two further elements of the memorial, one of which here, the second B-24 Liberator, Gypsy Queen, and Kerry Wilmot there, instrumental in that work. Gives a wave, Kerry, gives a wave, well done. So we have two remarkable individuals who have committed themselves to a serious task of remembrance for people they never met and never knew. And remembrance is really what it's about. If we forget, we repeat the mistakes of the past. Even by remembering, sometimes we repeat them, but that's human nature. Moments like this, gatherings like this, ceremonies like this, remind us all of a thing we share, our humanity, which can never be demeaned, must never be lost. That's enough from me. And now please invite Professor Howell Claiborne to come forward.
Thank you very much, Zane. And I just wanted to say, on behalf of my family, my wife Terry, our sons Robert and Alex, that I just wanted to thank you extremely for all of the hospitality and all of your efforts and the efforts on the part of the Village Hall Committee in bringing this program to fruition. It's been a wonderful experience. I also wanted to recognize three special guests that are here today. One is Andy Wells, standing here to my right. Andy and I first made contact by email in about 2019. Andy is one of the managing partners of the Seething Control Tower and Museum. And in particular, I want to acknowledge Andy because he was the first contact I had in Britain that led me into the field of 8th Air Force history in Britain. And I want to thank Andy for that. Secondly, I wanted to acknowledge Mr. Bob Collis, standing behind Andy. Bob is a noted World War II aviation historian. He is associated with the Norfolk and Suffolk Aviation Museum. And most notably, Bob spoke at the 1999 dedication of this very Barsham Memorial. And the third person that I'd like to acknowledge, standing over here to my left, is Mr. Johnson Moore and his wife Betsy, who we met again by very serendipitous methods, in which Andy met Johnson and related to me. Johnson Moore's father was Constable Bert Moore of the Beccles Police Force. And on the evening of April 22nd, 1944, Constable Bert Moore was called into action at the crash site in which Glen Ferguson and other members of the crew lost their lives. He not only was present for the security of the crash site to prevent media and other curiosity seekers to access the site, but also later in the process, he and one other constable from Beccles were sent to Ringsfield to retrieve the remains of Sergeant Edward Hoke, who died when his parachute harness failed and he fell to his death in Ringsfield. So Johnson, I wanted to acknowledge your efforts in this as well. In terms of the speakers, obviously I would like to thank you all for agreeing to participate in this. As I said, Mr. Blanchard, of course, for helping to organize the program. Mr. Ivan Bernard, standing next to Emma Wells, noted historian and organizer, etc., for the 467th Bomb Group Association, of which he is a director. Glen Ferguson and crew flew with the 467th Bomb Group based at Rackheath. Ivan is also, in the last few years, was the founding member of the Rackheath Pathfinders, which is a group dedicated to the restoration of historical sites at the Rackheath airfield. And in fact, he gave us a wonderful tour of that site just this morning. The next speaker will be Mr. Ian McLaughlin, noted author and World War II aviation historian. And in particular, in 1992, Ian published the book, The Night of the Intruders, which details the calamity and the horror and the tragedy throughout East Anglia on the evening of April 22nd, 1944, including the crash of the B-24 bomber known affectionately as Misfire, in which Lieutenant Staley Reed, Lieutenant Glen Ferguson, and 5 other members of their crew died. I think with that, I will conclude, and I will simply ask Ivan to come forward to say a few words about the 467th Bomb Group Association and the relevance to today's event.
Where can you start? It's a very emotional reunion. Most of what you've already heard, I think, tells the story. From my perspective as a director of the 467th Bomb Group, which is an honor because I'm an Englishman, not an American. I was last standing here in September 23 when we brought 36 descendants over for a week, the first Norwich reunion for a long time. Ian was here. Ian told us about the night of the intruders. So it was that Monday morning, on that week's visit, this was the first place we wanted to be. I guess one could talk all day, but we don't have all day. It's very, very important to keep the history and the narrative of the 467th alive from Rackheath, but also there were 14 2nd Air Division American bases around Norwich. Almost 7,000 of those, sadly, never went home. So I think you understand where I'm coming from. Perhaps we should just, if we can, perhaps we should just have a moment of silence for them. And even the traffic has stopped. Thank you. I have a letter here. It's not actually relevant to this particular crash site or to the people involved here, but just a paragraph I will read. It was signed by 17 of the guys who served at Rackheath, and it demonstrates the feeling, I think, of everybody. And they say, sometimes it is extremely difficult to write a letter of appreciation Difficult because the English language or any other language is a hopeless, inadequate medium of expression when the heart is speaking. We feel, however, that we should make an attempt to reveal our gratitude for the way you people have befriended us and have allowed us to make your home our home these past 16 months. No other family in England could have been nicer to the many Americans who were fortunate enough to discover Colden Hall. It's a very moving letter. There's a lot more to it. But just to finish with, one of the signatures to this letter was a man called, funnily enough, Howell Taylor. And Howell Taylor was the quartermaster. And a few years ago, believe it or not, the quartermaster's command car was found. A friend of mine now has it. It's a 3.5-year project to totally restore it. It is now complete, and I've been out in it on road tests. And in September this year, if you'd all like to come to the forum in Norwich, there's a 10-day event on there called Silver Wings. It's not just in the American Library, it's in the whole of the ground floor of the forum. But on the Saturday, on the 13th, this particular vehicle will be with others on show. Thank you for being here.
Our next speaker will be Mr. Ian McLaughlin. Ian?
Well, the book is 80,000 words. You'll be delighted to know that I'm not reading all of them. Trying to sum up the events that night is not an easy task. And I was asked by Howell if I could just put a few words together, and I've done my best. And I noted that this year we've marked 80 years since VE Day, the end of the war in Europe. The Americans were leaving East Anglia, perhaps to fight in the Pacific. But commemorating VJ Day is still to come. And those boys weren't required to fight in the Pacific, as history now tells us. But not all of them departed these shores. Of some 26,000 killed in action, 3,812 remain with us at rest in Madingley near Cambridge. They left gaps in families, gaps that reverberate down through generations. Witness today. They left and their lives were unfulfilled. Today, yes, we're going to share a few moments to mark, honour and remember 7 of those lives. We pay our respects to a young bomber crew memorialised here when their B-24 Liberator fell just across the road. It was a victim in a legendary battle that erupted in these very skies on the 22nd of April 1944. Colloquially, it was the night Jerry followed the Yanks home. Details surrounding those events were kept secret, but historians strive to determine the facts, and I've done my best in the night of the intruders, but I'm always learning and there is always more to add. The book relates the truth behind Mission 311. Weather, bad weather, causing an unusually late takeoff to attack the German railway marshalling yards in Ham. This was a vital choke point for the movement of German troops come the invasion just a few short weeks away. So it was vital to destroy that target. Unfortunately, a navigational error caused several hundred liberators to return to their bases in darkness. Radar defences were swamped by the sheer number of returning bombers, and a small force of German intruders infiltrated the American formation. Just off the coast, the first liberator was caught and carved a fiery path to destruction. 10 more aircraft followed, including the one we remember here. The enemy were elusive. They were wolves in a flock of bombers, and there was chaos and carnage that night. Airfields were attacked, including Rackheath. And events that night have become something of a legend in local folklore. I grew up with that legend, and I've tried to do something now to recognise the legend, but also relate the truth. 3 of the crew, as we know, parachuted to safety, including Marvin Shank, who was here in 1999 when the memorial was dedicated. And this was following efforts by a gentleman we've already mentioned, Dennis Spall, who was determined that these young men should not be forgotten. Now, Dennis and Marvin are no longer with us. There are fewer and fewer of that greatest generation still with us today. But the debt of gratitude owed by succeeding generations, mine included, and the younger members of your family, still owe that debt of gratitude. So one way of acknowledging this is to research and remember. And thanks to Professor Claiborne, Howell, if I may, we're with his family once again able to honour the sacrifice made by these young Americans. And his research into the life of Glen Ferguson tells us a bit more about the tragedy every time one of these aircraft went down, and how lives like Glen's were left unfulfilled. Thanks to Al, his story is now more fully told. My own personal thanks to you and to your family for coming over and sweltering in British sunshine on a very, very hot day. Thank you.
I wanted to also thank the members of the audience for taking their time to come and help us to remember Glen Ferguson and the other members of the crew of the B-24 misfire. I'll start with some remarks about sort of the biographical background of Glen Ferguson and his family, which are particularly relevant, I think, to the location that we're gathered at today. In 1909, 27-year-old James Ferguson left his home in Paisley, Scotland, and came to America. He joined his brother Thomas and his family living in Central Falls, Rhode Island. James's fiancée, Elizabeth Glen, followed him from Paisley a year later, and they were married on April 21, 1910. The Fergusons had 2 children, Lillian, born in 1911, and her younger brother Glen, born in 1918. By 1925, the family was living in a rental home on Broad Street, a short walk from the Central Falls YWCA, where James worked as custodian and caretaker. 200 years ago, over the years 1825 and 1826, the Reverend Howell Taylor established the Tabernacle community a few miles from my hometown of Brownsville, Tennessee, with two of his sons and their families. Dr. John Thornton Sr., born in 1887, was a direct descendant and a prominent Brownsville physician. He and his wife Mildora had two children, John Jr. and Helen, who was born in 1918. Glen Ferguson graduated from Central Falls High School and went on to what is now the University of Rhode Island in Kingston, where he graduated in 1941. Helen Thornton graduated from high school in Brownsville in 1936 and attended Wesleyan College in Georgia. Then came the war. In the summer of 1942, Glen was an aviation cadet in pre-flight training with the Army Air Forces at Kelly Field, San Antonio, Texas. For several months over 1942 and or 1943, Helen Thornton worked with the American Red Cross in San Antonio. Glen and Helen met and they fell in love. On January 14, 1944, the weekly Brownsville newspaper carried the announcement of the plans for the marriage of Helen Bond Thornton and Second Lieutenant Glen Ferguson to be solemnized in Salt Lake City. Glen was the navigator with the B-24 Liberator crew led by First Lieutenant Staley Reed, which was in pre-deployment training with the 467th Bomb Group at Wendover Airfield in Utah. The couple was married on Friday, January 21 at the First Presbyterian Church. 3 weeks later, Glen and Helen said what would be their final goodbyes, and he boarded his B-24, bound for England and the war. Helen moved back to her parents' home in Brownsville. James and Elizabeth Ferguson and their daughter Lillian went on with their lives in Central Falls. April 21, 1944, marked the 3-month wedding anniversary for Helen and Glen. The date also marked the 34th wedding anniversary for Glen's parents in Central Falls. 2 days later, on Sunday, April the 23rd, the Fergusons likely attended services at the First Presbyterian Church in Central Falls. Later that day, James Ferguson quietly celebrated his 63rd birthday with his wife and daughter in their modest rental home on Broad Street. The next morning, he would likely walk the 2 blocks up the street to the YWCA, where he had now worked for more than 25 years. But at 10:18 p.m. local time on Saturday, April the 22nd, misfire crashed in a field across the road from the Barsham schoolhouse and exploded. In Brownsville and in Central Falls, it was Saturday afternoon. Glen Ferguson, Staley Reed, and 2 other members of their crew are buried in Cambridge American Cemetery. The names of all 7 crew members who perished that night are found in the Roll of Honor in the American Memorial Chapel, St. Paul's Cathedral. Next year, on July the 4th, 2026, the 75th anniversary of General Dwight Eisenhower's presentation of the Roll of Honor to the Dean of St. Paul's will be observed. During that 1951 service, the Dean of St. Paul's recited from John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. Then said he, I am going to my fathers, and though with great difficulty I am got hither, yet now I do not repent me of all the trouble I have been at to arrive where I am. My sword I give to him that shall succeed me in my pilgrimage, and my courage and skill to him that can get it. My marks and scars I carry with me to be a witness for me that I have fought his battles, who now will be my rewarder. When the day that he must go hence was come, many accompanied him to the riverside, into which as he went, he said, Death, where is thy sting? And as he went down deeper, he said, Grave, where is thy victory? So he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side. In 2016, 98-year-old Helen Thornton passed away. Helen and Glen are reunited today. Thank you. Mr. Alistair Cameron will now provide the musical conclusion to the program.
Close to the sovereign, strange alarm.
Thank you all again for being here, and I'd like to ask the special guests that I mentioned and the speakers to please stay here for a few minutes for some group photographs, if possible. Thank you.